8 times as much all of a sudden. So it's bouncing up and down pretty quickly. Pretty much the only sources we have today that can handle that are hydro, which we don't have much of and don't have much prospect of expanding, and simple cycle natural gas. Now, the simple cycle natural gas is about 50% less heat efficient than what's called combined cycle natural gas, which has heat exchangers on the exhaust output of these engines that turns water into steam and creates additional electricity. Combined cycle units get about 50% more energy from a cubic foot of natural gas than a simple cycle unit does. And that's a simple cycle unit on its normal mission, which is to handle emergencies now and then, to handle extreme peaks on hot summer afternoons. They aren't used very much, but that's intentional. When they're called on to be used, they work pretty much every time.
Right.
Plenty of downtime for them to be maintained. So here we have a situation where if you used combined cycle natural gas, which is much more efficient than simple cycle natural gas, to replace coal burning directly, you'd be very close to the same amount of carbon dioxide emission avoidance as you would using simple cycle natural gas combined with wind energy. So wind energy really isn't much of a player there, but it's costly. It creates all kinds of mechanisms and emergency auctions that have higher margins for short-term power called spot market auctions.
Right.
And it kind of has a Rube Goldberg effect, if you know what the devices are where somebody's alarm goes off and a ball rolls across the floor and dominoes fall and eventually he's got a pot of coffee at the other end. That's kind of
California got caught up in that.
Yeah, they did. So,
all right, we're moving right along. Do you subscribe to claims that wind energy is free because it has no fuel cost? If not, isn't it at least competitive with other modes of electricity generation?
Okay, as we've discussed already, the product of wind energy is much like fool's gold. In that it provides very little secure capacity. It's raw kilowatt hours. They don't correspond with demand very well. So they set up this situation where, one might think that the purchase of it should be the same as the purchase of any other kilowatt hour, but because it doesn't stay stable for very long, it really doesn't have the same value. So it's really not fair to compare its cost, kilowatt hour per kilowatt hour, with a reliable source. It's a different animal. But no, it's very expensive to produce and carries the highest production subsidy of any electrical energy source in the country, to prove it. They have numerous subsidies at the federal level, including some depreciation scales, some loan guarantees, a production tax credit of 2.1 cents per kilowatt hour. They have states mandating its use with penalties associated with non-compliance, which add to what it can be sold for. And most of the records that I can find that actually look at the income statements, balance sheets, grid records, revenue streams for wind energy projects, only about 1/3 of the revenue stream for wind energy comes from selling electricity at otherwise market rates. In other words, ignoring the mandates and the penalties. So,
where does the rest of it come from?
The revenues come from primarily subsidies, but some also from, I would say, renewable energy credit market that isn't very well audited. A company or a person can buy from somebody what they call green power. Well, as you know, you can't ship green power through the transmission grid and pull it out at the other end. It's like pouring paint.
Still say it's green.
Right. I mean,
now it's mixed with
everything
else. Right.
Yeah, I mean, you can pour a gallon of green paint in one end of a swimming pool, but you can't take it out at the other end.
Right.
So renewable energy credits, federal subsidies and tax breaks, and state mandates are the primary sources of revenue for these projects. When wind energy occurs in the middle of the night, when we really don't need any more, we're just running on base load. Wind energy is changing the rules in our grids to be able to bid negative for a kilowatt hour of power. In other words, pay the grid to take the stuff. They can do that because they've got per kilowatt hour subsidies, 2.1 cents per kilowatt hour. They sell it for, or they pay 1.1 cents for the grid to take it. They still make a penny per kilowatt hour. So why waste that wind energy, right?
Right.
As long as it stays underneath the variable costs of operating the plant, the maintenance and upkeep. So those are the kinds of things that our policies set up. So if there's a lesson, if there is one, it's that wind energy creates costs that don't show up on its own financial statements.
All right. Here's another one. You have raised suspicion that wind energy may not be about improving the environment or even improving our international energy trade imbalance. What proof do you have that your criticisms are valid?
Well, first of all, I really feel like the burden of proof for someone who goes to the government and says, I've got a better mousetrap, why don't you pay me to sell it, even though I can't sell it at a profit on my own.
Okay.
The burden of proof of that better mousetrap and its benefits is on the producer. It's not on the skeptic. And I really feel like Congress goofed, well-intentioned as they are, and I know they are, without demanding proof of either reduction in greenhouse gases or reduction in import of foreign oil. They're paying them for those claims when technically they don't really provide them. So first of all, there's that. Now, I also have a list of sources.
It seems to me that they're trying to do, what they're trying to do is do the research and try and have a competitive market at the same time.
That's
without
correct.
having done all of the, it's like we'll do them in parallel, down the same line. And maybe not all of the kinks have been worked out. And that could be true that could have been true for just about
nuclear.
anything.
It was true.
Yeah, and it was
has
true
been
for
true.
nuclear. They weren't sure that they can make it that safe.
Right.
And
But for wind, this has been going on for a long time. U.S. federal subsidies for wind began in the early 80s, okay, on the promise of, we're going to make it someday. This has been going on in Europe for the same amount of time with even heavier subsidies, which are now tending to expire. Spain has done away with a lot of their renewable subsidies fairly rashly and suddenly, which
Right.
disruptive to a lot of to their economy and to their citizens. So anything like making a change in course like that should be done a little more gradually to give people a chance to make a switch.
absolutely.
Denmark, another big story. President Obama has made statements since he's become president that Denmark generates 20% of their electricity from wind power. Well, that's not really true. They do generate the equivalent amount of kilowatt hours to 20% of their usage, but they have to export half of it because it comes at times when they can't use it. Their other generators can't get out of the way, or there just isn't demand for electricity like that. And they sell it at a fire sale. And then they have to buy hydro back from other parts of Scandinavia at times when the wind isn't blowing, but they do need electricity, and they pay a premium for that. So the citizens of Denmark subsidize wind energy very highly, sell it for next to nothing when they don't need it, and then still have a need to buy imported hydro at premium prices when all of Europe is using a lot of electricity and demand is high.
Last question.
Okay.
Development opportunities of this scale are precious in relatively rural areas like Champaign County. Okay. Wind energy has been proliferating across the world over the past 30 years with as much as $500 million in infrastructure. And all the associated construction for a project like Buckeye Wind, which I think is listed at $200 million. But I think that's just for the project. That's not for all of the other stuff that you have to change and change back.
Okay.